Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Amanda Nichols from CCIQ and I'll be your facilitator for today. Joining us from Optimum Recoveries is Commercial Debt Management Expert Angela McDonald and Legal Practice Director at Streten Masons Lawyers, Craig Mason. Thank you both for you coming in today. Australian business is amongst the worst in the world, and when it comes to paying invoices on time, they are the worst, when it comes to paying invoices on time. And it's not just SMEs who are late payers. Large corporations are equally tardy. Now it's time to take control by tightening up your processes, polishing up your terms and conditions, and recovering that overdue invoices. Now today, Angela and Craig will provide you with 10 actionable tips you can implement within a month to prevent unpaid invoices and also get control of your accounts receivable and recover what's owed to you. Now, before we start, there is an opportunity to send through your questions to both Craig and Angela using the chat box that appears on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. You can type them through at any stage during the webinar and we'll collate them at the end and ask them. Any we don't get to today, we'll take offline. Okay, so now I'll hand over to both Angela and Craig, who are going to take you through today's webinar.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you everybody for joining us today. It's lovely to be spending lunch with you. As Amanda mentioned, Australia unfortunately has a reputation of being slow generally to pay accounts, and the research that was released earlier this year showed that even countries like, say, Mexico had better payment trends than we do. Xero launched its Small Business Insight research in September using data from more than 500,000 small businesses in Australia to deliver a comprehensive picture of the conditions and health of the sector. Startling but factual was the headline, "Small Businesses on the Brink with Only Half Recording Positive Cash Flow." The biggest cause of failure through that report was simply that they ran out of cash. Now, small businesses and their owners in particular that extend credit have a right to feel uncomfortable. Many are acting as free bank to their customers who extend agreed credit terms. And we're here today to talk about 10 things that you can do within the month to change that. I'll hand you over to Craig Mason to talk about point number 1, expectations are everything. Start with the end in mind.
Great. Thanks, Angela, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the CCIQ for having us in. Before we start with the tips, I just wanted to quickly just cover a legal element to it, and with the disclaimer. Now, all this information that we're going to discuss today is of a general nature. It's not specific to your particular circumstances, and also today's focus is on commercial business-to-business transactions, so it's not consumer. So if you've got any questions that are specific to your exact circumstances, if we can answer them today, we'll endeavour to do so. But as Amanda said, we can take this offline and have a further discussion specific to exactly what you're talking about. So everything's going to be of a general nature. So the first tip is start with the end in mind. So thousands of businesses have an insolvency event every year, and 97% of unsecured creditors get back 11 cents in the dollar. So unsecured creditors are creditors that don't hold any security, hence the term unsecured, which is most businesses today will be unsecured creditors. Most of the secured creditors will be banks or your larger organisations. So when you start a new business relationship, obviously it's an exciting time. You've got a new customer, you're thinking the sky is the limit. But it pays to start the new relationship with the end in mind. So hopefully nothing ever happens, but if you work on the basis that something might, then you're going to be in the best possible position if something does happen. So having terms and conditions and those sorts of things that govern the transaction or the agreement that you're in will mean that everyone's on the same page. So it's not all one-sided. It's to govern both parties. So it'll be, not just one-sided to one party, so they can terminate at any time and charge you exorbitant interest and various things. So the fine print might seem boring, and to a lawyer, obviously, this is part of our business that we look at the fine print and make it as relevant as possible and not too fine. You don't want to make it too small where you've got a magnifying glass out and going through those sorts of things. So it's an important thing to get right. And as I said, it's not just one-sided, it's for everyone. So often it can be overlooked, but those words can come in handy if your invoice isn't paid. So as part of this tip, introducing into your business a credit application or some form of application form, which is your external documents, and also terms and conditions, which is what I spoke about before, and also an internal policy, so your credit policy. And the policy should include things like how you decide when customers are going to receive credit, your payment terms and any limits within that, so your credit limits, and any tolerance in relation to outstanding accounts. As part of your policy, and I think this is a really important part of it, is that you've got an authorised person that can make decisions regarding credit. And we suggest that person, there should be one person. It's not everyone can sort of make those decisions. It's in the end, it's one person that makes the decision and ticks the relevant box and goes through that process. And it also, part of your credit policy is how you follow up or how you deal with accounts when they're outstanding. It's a very important process. Obviously, cash flow with any business is king, and without it, you may not have a business. So having a process in place as part of your policy as to what happens when accounts are outstanding is very important. And again, we suggest that there be one person responsible for those sorts of things. So that's your credit policy. As part of that as well, when you're dealing with your outside customers, you've got your credit application and your terms and conditions. One of the most important parts of that is that you're able to clearly identify the person that you're doing business with. So obviously there's two parts to that. One is so you know exactly who you're dealing with, and the other one is if something does happen, you may and you need to proceed down the legal path, you know who it is that you need to target. So being able to clearly identify that person is very important. How your goods or services are going to be supplied, obviously when is payment required, and how that payment is to be made, what consequences there are if you don't pay. And going back to the unsecured part, you might have some form of security, and that could be by way of a personal guarantee, a security interest through the Personal Property Securities Register, some form of extra security that you can put in place to allow, hopefully, if something does happen, that you get paid. Obviously, the theme of today's webinar is about 10 tips you can implement within a month. So these things, it's never too late to get onto it and get these terms and credit policies into your business. Obviously, you can't retrospectively apply these things, but if you get it in place now, then going forward, you'll be in the best possible situation. So it's never too late. Get onto it as soon as you can. So these are obviously just a few examples of the many important terms that should be included. And as you can see, the fine print when it comes to these sorts of things becomes crucial if someone fails to pay you. So I'll move on to Angela and the second tip.
Thanks, Craig. So tip number 2 is that anything worth doing is worth measuring. My dad was a bit of an old chippy, and I think the motto was always measure twice, cut once. And to be able to improve your collections, you need to measure where you are and where you're going. So there are a number of metrics you can use. The most common is DSO, or Days Sales Outstanding, which measures the average number of days a business takes to collect trade receivables. A high DSO number indicates that it's taking too long to collect your accounts and therefore costing you more money. Once you understand your current position, you're better able to set a goal and take steps to lower the DSO, improving your collection rate and cash flow. You can calculate it monthly across your ledger using a formula which is basically total accounts receivable divided by your net credit sales multiplied by the number of days in a period. So we'll do one together. If we take a company that measures its DSO as at the end of September, and September being a 30-day month, it would be, say, a net credit during the month of $500,000, total accounts receivable of $400,000, and then our 30 days. So the calculation would be $400,000 divided by $500,000 multiplied by the 30 days. And that brings in the DSO at 24 days. That's not bad as examples go, but economic watchdog Dun & Bradstreet reported that only 12% of ASX companies pay their bills on time, and almost 10% of all Aussie companies pay in excess of 60 days beyond agreed terms. The highest risk actually were companies between 2 and 5 years for failing to pay on time or for failure generally. Now, with the DSO, an elite athlete would never reach their PB without training. So for improved DSO, it's important that you calculate it across your past company's performance, or if you have access to it, use an industry benchmark so that it's meaningful to help you drive performance. Now, I know we rushed through that example of how to calculate DSO, so if you'd like an example emailed to you, my email address will be provided at the end of the presentation. I get to share tip 3 with you today, which is we don't know what we don't know. How true is that, right? We don't know what we don't know. If you joined Craig and I for a presentation before, you know that we're huge fans of credit checking to help inform credit decisions. Before you take on a new customer and offer them a credit account, you should be doing your due diligence. Check their credit report for important credit risk indicators, so actions and defaults that may affect their ability to pay your invoices on time every time. Just like your individual credit file, all businesses do have a credit history, and before you extend credit, you should be carrying out an inquiry, not only to ensure that you're likely to be paid on time, but also to protect your business from the risk of bad debt and legal disputes down the track. Now, if you haven't seen a credit report, the sorts of information that would be available on one would be asset data, so information from the Australian Securities Investment Commission that would validate the company details, structure and important documents that have been lodged, such as insolvency notices. ABR and ABN lookup data to verify registration for GST. Director and shareholder data, which may indicate historical credit issues, so perhaps one of the directors has been involved with a failed entity in the past, so there's a propensity for risk there. Actions from courts around Australia. The courts nowadays register judgment, so if you've issued a claim and obtained a judgment, then the court will share that information with the various credit bureaus. Those credit bureaus could be, VITA, also known as Equifax now, Creditor Watch, Asperion or others, whichever you prefer. Other things on your report could include mercantile inquiries or defaults lodged by debt collectors on behalf of clients. And it could even include an indicator, a payment indicator, which takes into account information like all of the things that I just mentioned, as well as the payment trending terms for that industry sector, to give you a visual indicator as to whether or not your account would be paid on time. This is all vital information that should be part of your risk management plan. Knowledge is power to help you make an informed decision. And really, you need to remember that you are extending a loan, so do your research, exercise caution, and make sure that the applicant is worthy of credit. Credit is a privilege, it's not a right.
Excellent. Number 4, pretty straightforward. Invoice sooner, get paid faster. So obviously the longer you take to invoice your customer, the longer it takes to get paid. That seems pretty obvious, but we see it all the time where clients will take some time to invoice and obviously then it takes longer to get paid. So when you're setting your payment terms, you need to consider what's right for your business. You don't necessarily have to follow the industry norm. So it might be 7 or 14 or 30 days. Some industries you see that are 30 days from the end of the month in which the invoice or goods were provided. So if it's in that instance, then you're talking about effectively 100 days where you are extending credit to your customers. Which means that they're using those goods or utilising those services and they're not paying you for another 100 days. Xero has a suggestion where you amend your term for payment to something unique. An example is 11 days, which is obviously not something that you see. That's going to stand out from the crowd and might mean that someone will read that and actually hit a buy to it. So we suggest try it. You might be surprised as to what difference it might make to your business. But the overarching thing is, if you don't invoice, then you don't get paid. With your invoice as well, you want to make it as straightforward and as easy as possible. So make the due date, as I said, stand out on your invoice, bold it, those sorts of things so people can see it. Make sure the invoice is accurate and includes all the information required. Example, purchase order, if you're in that industry where there's purchase orders, or everything's described in there and there's no ambiguity where someone might say, oh, that doesn't include that, I'll wait for that invoice, or whatever it might be. So make sure it's clear. If you can, offer multiple payment options. So you might have EFT, credit card, direct debit into your direct debit out of their account, something like PayPal or the equivalent online platforms. You want to make it as easy as possible that someone can pay you. So it's, if you've got it in there and you can email the invoice and there's a link there that they can click on and it goes to some form of payment thing, then chances are they might click on it quickly, and then you'll get paid. The other things are, you might consider introducing some form of progress payment or deposit into your process so that you get some of the money up front or along the way as well, which obviously helps with cash flow and reduces the risk that you won't get paid. With credit cards, you need to bear in mind at the moment there's been a change in relation to the surcharge that you can pass on to the customer. It now needs to be basically exactly what you're actually getting charged by your bank, wherever it might be. So you need to look into that and make sure you're not charging excessive fees on a credit card. So if you are, obviously, good on you for joining us. And when you finish up with this webinar, you should probably go about changing that now, because you're in breach of the legislation. So that's one tip you get out of today. Great. Just quickly as well with this tip, invoicing sooner, we had a client that didn't invoice straight away and they left it for a while. And eventually they raised an invoice and sent it to their customer. And lo and behold, it didn't get paid straight away, and disputes were raised about it. And the main dispute was that the invoice took so long to come that they'd moved on to another job and finalised all of that. Not really any excuse necessarily, because the job was done, you still need to pay for it. But because it took a long time for the invoice to be issued, there now was a dispute and they weren't getting paid straight away. They did get paid eventually. It took some negotiations and some back and forth between our office and the customer. But obviously at this point there's been a lengthy delay. You haven't received your money, and further to that, you've incurred some costs as well, which makes it even worse. So tip 4, invoice sooner, get paid faster, I think is a really good one. Moving on to number 5, which is still me. All right, so monitor for warning signs. Obviously, monitoring the way a customer treats your relationship is one aspect, and that's easy to monitor if you follow the tip that Angela spelt out before. And obviously, you're there, you can see how the customer's treating you and how long they're taking to be paid. But you must also look more broadly than that. And through that, you would use a credit bureau, and they offer automated risk monitoring services, which means that you'll be alerted by email, and this is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, when one of your customers' circumstances changes. And you'll be provided with an up-to-date information that will allow you to respond immediately. And so the sorts of things that are monitored are court actions. So if there's a judgment being entered, then you'll get an alert. If there's any insolvency notice filed with ASIC, then you'll get an alert. And if there's been an administrator or liquidator appointed, then you'll get an alert. If there's payment defaults for other providers, then you'll get an alert for that. Or if there's any mercantile inquiries on the person's file. There might be changes to the actual company structure, their ABN or ACN or their name might change. or there could be addresses or directorship changes. So all of these things, if you get an alert, except for the court actions and the insolvency notices, obviously, which means that the company's in trouble, and payment defaults obviously means that they've failed to pay a different supplier. But things like address changes or director changes don't mean that the world's falling down. It just means that they've changed their address potentially, but it could also mean that they are trying to avoid something as well. So that's where that alert becomes relevant. It might be that their registered office has changed from their accountant, for instance. Again, doesn't necessarily mean there's anything to it, but we've seen where customers are changing their registered office from their accountant. It could be that they, let's put it bluntly, haven't paid their accountant's fees. So those sorts of warning signs need to be monitored, and when you have the alerts, then you can make decisions based on that. One example that we've had recently where our customer was alerted, they had the alert process in place, and they were alerted of a insolvency action. They had a large amount of invoices outstanding at that point, and because they were alerted, they were essentially ahead of the pack and able to secure payment because they got on it quickly through the director under a personal guarantee prior to the company going into liquidation, and they were paid in full within 5 days of receiving that alert. Without that alert, it would have gone on for a lot longer. And further to that, they also had about $50,000 worth of stock in the warehouse that they were about to supply as well. So being able to get that alert meant that they, one, got paid the $70,000 and also were able to supply that $50,000 worth of stock and also get paid in the end. Actually, no, they didn't do the $50,000 worth of stock because they got the alert. So, you can conduct a review of your existing customers today, which is the whole point of the webinar. These are things that you can do this month to make sure that you are in the best possible spot to get paid on time. So the bureaus offer free trials, so look into that. And if you've got any questions about that, as we've said already, we're happy to help you out on that. So, but moral of the story is get onto it, and you can do it this month. Number 6, Angela.
Thanks, Craig. So, number 6, fast recovery equals better cash flow. And that might seem a bit obvious, but we're going to tap on that one anyway. Really, nothing breaks your heart or your wallet in business like an overdue invoice. You've put in the hard work, the products or services have been delivered, and your invoice sits waiting. Now, earlier we calculated DSO together to get a handle on how our customers are paying on average, but we need to keep in mind that every day a customer withholds payment, you're losing money and they're getting an interest-free loan. If you regularly have $20,000 in outstanding accounts, that's around $2,700 that you're giving away in interest to your customers every year. I wonder, what you could do with that extra $2,790 in your business. In our experience, there are 3 main reasons why clients don't pay on time. First reason is cash flow issues, and in which case they need to be discussing that with you and working out a way to pay down the account by way of instalments. Perhaps they're unhappy with the product or service, and again, in which case they need to talk to you about that to resolve it, not simply not pay. Or they've spent the money that they owe you on something else. So what can you do? The first thing is make a call. They might have simply misplaced the invoice or could be experiencing a short-term cash flow problem that you can resolve together. I would suggest that you don't assume the worst, and most importantly, that we stay cool and professional at all times. We've seen some crazy accounts be referred to us because somebody's been impolite or rude in the way in which they've communicated a request for payment. We also heard recently about a debtor for one of our clients, but not actions of our clients, where somebody spray painted the display property for the debtor with some derogatory remarks. Now, unfortunately, that property had been sold to somebody else. So the actions taken hurt somebody who was unrelated to the account and unrelated to the issue. So stay cool and be professional at all times. We strongly suggest that you keep records of any agreements made and follow everything up in writing to lock those agreements in place. And that you consider that the longer you leave an account outstanding, as Craig mentioned earlier during the invoicing point, the longer you leave it, the harder it is to recover. It's harder to recover because people move on, emails get lost, information goes astray, and it becomes harder to prove your debt the longer it is. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide, which is all about communication. Number 7, communicate even if your customers won't. So money can be a difficult topic to discuss. And before you pick up the phone to prepare for the call, there's some things that you can do to get ready to make sure that it's the most effective call that you can make. Make sure that you know who you're calling and the best time to give them a call. Have the account details to hand and know what your aim of the call is. So perhaps practice it. Do a bit of role playing with yourself before you pick up the phone and make that call. You know, Craig, I'd like to receive payment in full no later than close of business Friday will be the aim of the call, and you'll have practiced that before you pick up the phone. If you start with the right attitude, then you'll achieve more. It's the old honey and vinegar story. You need to be professional yet personable. If you're anxious or angry in any way, just take a couple of minutes before you pick up the phone and make that call to get yourself ready, to get your mindset just right to make the call. Use your voice effectively. Remember, you know, you're talking on the phone, so you need to make sure that you have really good pitch in your voice, that your voice is powerful, that you keep a good pace, and that you pause at the appropriate moment. When we're nervous or agitated, our voice has a natural instinct to go up, to be slightly higher in pitch. And interestingly, women will generally be a little bit higher in pitch, but also go up at the end of a sentence that makes everything sound like a question. So be conscious of those things and drop the pitch of your voice just a little. Use variations in volume to highlight important points in the conversation. And adjust your pace of speech to be a little bit slower than it usually is. If you're speaking a little bit more slowly, then you're going to be clearer when you're communicating. And most importantly, remember to pause. Once you've opened the conversation, then allow the customer to speak. So your best collection tool then becomes your ears as you hear what the customer has to say about the account, and then you can continue on with the conversation. That said, if a customer won't communicate, you still need to take action to build up your evidentiary chain in an effort to resolve an account. So keep clear records of all of your interactions. Send an email or text message the day after an account falls due as a reminder. Send an email after speaking with or leaving a message for somebody to reinforce the responsibility of paying an account, a commitment, or even the ramifications of non-payment. And in terms of communication, oftentimes a great tool is our reps who are in the field, the eyes and ears in the field. A lot of our clients will have one of their reps do a bit of a drive-by to see if the business is still there, is still busy, is still trading, is still well-staffed, and all of those sorts of things.
Yeah. Excellent, Angela. And as always, there's a law that's in place that gives you some guidance in relation to these sorts of things. So there's some strict guidelines for creditors when contacting a customer. And these are outlined by the ACCC and ASIC. And these guidelines stipulate how, where, and when you can contact a customer for payment. And the types of restrictions that are included, and these are all pretty common sense type things, that the contact must be for a reasonable reason and at a reasonable time. So obviously calling someone at 5:30 in the morning, unreasonable. Calling them at 8:30 in the morning, reasonable. Calling someone on a Sunday night at 11 p.m, you'd probably say that's unreasonable. But if you called them potentially at a more reasonable time, 6 o'clock for instance, then that might be considered reasonable. Public holidays, there's to be no contact on public holidays. So as I said, pretty common sense. It also governs how many times you can make contact with the person within a given period. and that is no more than 3 times per week or 10 times per month. And as part of that, obviously, you need to keep track of, and that's why you have your policy in place and your procedures, so you know how many times you've contacted the person, so you don't fall foul of the guidelines. And the other one is that no contact should be made directly with that person if they've advised you that they're represented by a legal representative or whoever else it might be. So if anyone ever tells you that, then you shouldn't contact that person directly. You should then be contacting the representative. And as part of this, the evidence and the trail of evidence that you leave when you follow these processes can become important. So obviously, if someone ever challenges in relation to breaching the guidelines and you've got the evidence to say, no, I called you this day, we spoke about this, I emailed you on this day, so you've got it all there. But further to that, if something does happen and it ends up in court, for instance, you've got the evidence there that says that you followed up the invoices on these particular days. You received no response, or you received a response saying, yes, I'm going to pay, I just needed someone else to pay one of my bills, or whatever it might be. But if you've got all that evidence, then you can use that potentially down the track to say, in 6 months' time, they still haven't paid, and now they're raising a dispute that something wasn't done properly. You can then point to the email trail where it was never raised. It was always a cash flow issue. It was never a dispute over the quality of the goods or the work, and you can use that evidence to your advantage. So it's important for a number of reasons to keep track of how you're communicating when it comes to this. The one is obviously to comply with the guidelines and make sure you do. And the other one is that you might need that evidence down the track. It can protect your position in relation to costs or something like that as well. So important to keep the evidence trail. So that's number 7. Number 8, Angela.
Thanks, Craig. All right, number 8, we're going to embrace technology. When I started out in collections and credit, just a little while ago, the most technical thing in the office was the new fax machine. And thank goodness we've come a long way since then. We've mentioned technology several times today with credit checking, monitoring, and the automated alert systems, but you can take it further to help you in business to do more with less. We've mentioned Xero a couple of times today. So Xero, MyOb, and connected apps can help you automate email reminders, letters, and SMSs. But I'd encourage you to make sure that they're polite, professional, and still personal for best results. Personally, I dislike receiving invoice emails that actually say, here's your invoice. I'd rather have something say, hi Angela, thanks for your custom, please find attached your invoice, we look forward to payment, or something along those lines. So be polite and professional. Also, always ensure that your invoices and reminders are going to the right person to protect privacy. We have also talked today about using systems that allow you to keep an evidentiary trail. So use a smart CRM system to maintain complete account records, so your customer history and evidentiary chain. Flag disputes and escalate those disputes to the right person within your team. As Craig mentioned earlier, that would be covered within your credit policy to make sure that you've got a single point of contact to deal with and resolve escalated matters and disputes. They should be addressed promptly. The longer a dispute is unresolved, again, the harder it is to resolve that account and recover the payment. Again, through clever accounting systems nowadays, you can automate your monthly invoices and statements. You can offer customers a portal for self-service for online bill payment options. And many of our trade clients now use PDAs on site to confirm their quotes, have the customer sign for receipt and make payment on the spot by credit card, or even using Square or Shopify. Before and after photographs can work well as a nice customer service touch, but they can also come in handy when you're trying to deal with a dispute as to whether or not a service was provided. And I think it's also nice to thank your customer for making payments on time. It goes towards building a nice relationship.
Yeah, and even the legal system is slowly catching up with technology. Obviously, as the business community increases the technology they use, then the legal system needs to catch up, because they might need to decide on certain things. So something like electronic signatures is becoming more and more common in business now. And so the legal system has, cases and those sorts of things that determine that. And so electronic signatures in some circumstances are fine. You've just got to make sure that the person that's put the electronic signature on a document, for instance, has the authority to actually put that there. But if it's someone that's actually doing it electronically through the variety of platforms, then there shouldn't be an issue with that. There's also things with social media, Facebook and Twitter and those sorts of things, where we don't encourage people to talk to their customers on their in relation to collecting invoices. Obviously, you can talk to your customers on Facebook, but when you're talking to them about invoicing, then we don't suggest you use that platform. But you can send them a reminder or something like that on Facebook, or it can be used down the track, going back to the evidence, in relation to service. If someone is avoiding service and it comes to having to provide a court document, then you can use social media. So, yeah, embrace the technology. It's there to help in these situations. So, number 9, Angela, exploring the option of outsourcing, which I think is one of the they're all good 10 tips, obviously, but I think number 9 is a really good one. So, Angela.
Thanks, Craig. Okay, exploring the options of outsourcing. I guess in our busy lives, it's not uncommon for us to get help to stay on top of things like gardening and cleaning, and for me in particular, it's the dreaded ironing. But getting help from a professional that actually likes doing these things means that often they're done faster, cheaper, and that we can focus that time on doing the things that we're better at or enjoy more. Now, for our listeners today, you all own businesses, and unless that business is debt collection, you'd probably like to focus your efforts on running your business as opposed to collecting past due accounts. When customers owe you money, there are many ways to go about trying to collect the account. You could do it yourself, or you could appoint someone skilled and qualified to do it for you. Debt collection isn't an easy task. It takes a considerable amount of time and sometimes creativity to reach people who owe money. If you or your staff member is attempting to collect debts, then it can quickly become a full-time job. It also takes a good knowledge of the laws and regulations applicable to effectively and legally collect a debt. So if you or your staff aren't familiar with these rules, you could put yourself at risk of fines, penalties, or even a lawsuit. The faster you're paid, the better it is for your cash flow. So by getting in a little bit of help, you'll save in short and long term by saving time, money, gaining your payment faster, freeing up internal resources, lowering your overheads, benefiting or leveraging from your from the person's experience, and working with a specialist. Within Optimum Recoveries, we help business owners in the area of debt prevention, management and recovery. So debt prevention is talking about the policies and procedures and making sure you've got the right people with the right skill set making the collection calls for you. Debt management is where our cash flow collection specialist can act as your credit officer and make those calls on your behalf. Not everybody's comfortable in making those calls. Our team certainly are. And then we have a team of licensed debt collection agents who have many years of experience and also have the right qualifications to be able to collect accounts effectively and efficiently. And of course, we tie in with Streten Masons Lawyers as our solicitors. So explore the option of outsourcing if collecting debts is not something that you're comfortable in doing, or if you would prefer to be working on and in your business rather than chasing past due customers, then somebody like Optimum would be happy to help, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Angela. As I said, I think it's a very important tip. Takes the emotion out of it as well if it's a call that's been made. So definitely explore the option of outsourcing. So that brings us to tip number 10, take action. So this is obviously a last resort where you're taking action, and we're talking about action, we're talking about legal action here. So as Angela said, we work closely with Optimum Recoveries as their legal partners, and we're generally engaged when all the regular collection avenues have been exhausted. There's various steps to go through and options depending on the circumstances, and I'm obviously not going to go through all of those today. But I think with taking action, I think it's don't be afraid to take the action. You need to protect potentially your brand as well. So, you know, once you take the action, obviously a customer probably is going to become an ex-customer, but they haven't paid you for some reason. So, you know, if you want to be in business, then you need customers that pay you. So taking that action will mean hopefully that you do get paid. So it can be a complex process. You know, there's certain things that, or particular things that might come into it about, you know, determining who the actual customer is and those sorts of things. So it goes back to all the material that you've collected along the way. And your terms and conditions. So if you've got collection, recovery costs, interest, admin fees, all those sorts of things, you can be adding those into your action. And the whole point of it is to put you back in the same spot as what you would have been had you been paid on time. So we'd encourage, you can go through a process called QCAT, which is the Queensland Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and that's a no-cost, no legal representation jurisdiction. But if you want to, you know, go through the process with a lawyer and have their fees as part of the debt, then you need to go to the magistrate's court or the district court, depending on what it is. In terms of taking action, most times it's never too late to do it. Obviously, there are limitations in the Limitation of Actions Act about when you can take the action, but about 6 years in most circumstances, so hopefully you haven't left it that long. But taking action now, and hopefully even if you haven't followed any other tips, you can still take the action and you might get paid. So if you've got security and those sorts of things, then you can call those in and rely on those. And obviously, hopefully you've got fees and terms and conditions that allow you to recover those. So that's tip number 10. Now, Amanda, do we have any questions?
Thanks, Craig and Angela. That's very useful tips there. I hope everyone found that interesting. We have had some questions come through, so I'm just conscious of the time, so we'll get through as many as we can. First question, someone has asked, they actually sell hair and beauty products and want to know if they can just go to their customer and get their goods back if they're not paying their bills.
Great question, and unfortunately, as a lawyer, we've got to say it depends on your circumstances and what documents you've got in place. You might be able to. If you've got terms and conditions and an agreement with your customer, and you have registered that interest under the Personal Property Security Register, and tick the relevant boxes in that agreement, and when you register it, you might have a PPSR retention of title agreement, a security agreement, and you also, as part of that, again, if you've followed the registration process properly, you will have super priority if you've ticked the right box, which means that you may well be able to go and get those goods back and sell them or keep them for yourself. So it's important that you've got all those things in place. In your terms and conditions, you might have a right of access condition in there as well. So hopefully that's answered your question. Angela, did you want to add anything into that?
I think that we've jumped straight into an insolvency scenario. If it's a case that the entity is struggling in paying the account or not responding, but they haven't gone into any form of insolvency, there is an opportunity potentially to go and get your account. I'd open up communication to go and get your goods, I'd open up communication first and see if we could negotiate an agreement whereby they would return some stock for a partial credit or the like. Some of the stock may have been sold, so there still could be the issue of a debt as well. And again, there's an opportunity to negotiate repayment of that. That could be beneficial to all. I've seen an example not so long ago where one of our clients was open to that, and we worked out a plan where the salon owner was able to continue to purchase goods. She didn't want to change the products that she used. Her clients liked the products. She'd just had some health issues that impacted her business. So we were able to negotiate that she returned some stock, she kept some stock, she paid down the debt by way of an agreed instalment plan, and she never missed a beat. But most importantly, she was allowed to continue to purchase stock and trade on a cash before delivery basis. So that was a good outcome, I think, for our client, but as well as the customer. And that relationship continues today, just by having open communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, at what point is it worth getting into debt recovery? I have a debt of $5,000, this person's asking, but is it worth it with the costs of court fees and legal costs?
Look, I would say it is, and that's just not me saying it as a lawyer that practices in this area, but it is worth it at $5,000, you say, Amanda. So, like, in terms of the court costs, regardless of what's in your terms and conditions, once you engage with a lawyer and they proceed with court action, then their fees or part of their fees are recoverable under the scale. So, for a $5,000 debt, for instance, if you were going to proceed in the magistrate's court here in Queensland, so that's up to $150,000, then it'll cost about just over $1,000, including the filing fees and the professional fees, to start that process. And as I said, that gets added to your $5,000 debt. Hopefully, however, you followed some of our other tips some time ago, and you have terms and conditions in there that might allow you to recover collection fees or admin fees, charge interest at a higher rate than the current court default rate, which is 5.5% per annum. If you've got all those sorts of things in place, then maybe you can increase the debt and puts you, again, compensated for the time that it's spent not being paid. And so, yeah, I would say from a legal process point of view, it's definitely worth it. Angela, from your side of things, what have you got to say about a $5,000 debt that's outstanding?
Gosh, I take the position that if you don't ask, you won't get. So if you don't take steps to try to recover your account, then of course, the answer to an unasked question is always no. So with an account like this, from a collections perspective, by escalating it to a debt collection agency, it may show your customer that you are serious, that you are going to pursue and progress the matter, and that you do want payment in full. Craig touched on removing emotion from collecting an account by having a third party step in as well. You know, if something has gone awry with the relationship, then a third party stepping in might just be what's required to bring it back on track, to get you to paid or at least to settled. With an account for $5,000, for debt recovery agencies, we work on a success-based commission. So if we're successful in recovering an account, then we'd charge a commission for those services. If we're not successful in recovering an account, then we don't charge commission. So the way that I look at it, if our listener today has a debt for $5,000, they have 100% of nothing right now. And by referring it to a collection agency, they've got an opportunity of recovering that account less a commission, or if they have the right clauses in place, as Craig suggested, an opportunity to recover those commissions from the debtor as well, making them fully responsible for their account. So I would say $5,000, as long as it's not outside that 6-year period for the statute of limitations that Craig mentioned earlier, then you really should be trying to collect it. Were there any other questions?
Yes, so we've just got a couple more. Now, this is from a different point of view. This listener doesn't like making those money-chasing calls. So when do you suggest they can refer an account for collection?
I think I'll take that one, Craig. You know, there are a lot of clients, as we talked about during that outsource point, who aren't comfortable in making calls and or who just want to get on with doing the business that they're in. So we have clients that utilise our Cashflow collections division, and in that area we make the calls generally when the account is falling due, and we'll follow up payment on behalf of our client. There are some clients where we've had to go through an education process with their customers to remind them of the terms, and that's where a preemptive customer care style call can be really effective. So before the invoice is due, give them a call, make sure that they've received the goods and services and that they're happy with everything and that everything is in order, that they have the invoice, that they have all of the documentation that their processes require for swift payment, and that the monies will be received on the agreed day. So the short answer is you can make a call, whether it be a customer care call or an account call. A customer care call is a preemptive call, or an account call as soon as the account falls due.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming from a different hat, from a business owner's point of view, yeah, as Angela said, no one likes making those particular calls. So, you know, you need to either engage someone, outsource it, tip number 9, or put a process in place that you can follow and practice these sorts of things. So, yeah, I don't think anyone likes making those calls, but
we love it.
Yeah, and yeah. So it's, you know, it's important that you're spending time doing other things as well. That's why you outsource and get experts in that field to help your business. It's like with anything. So pretty important to outsource it and follow tip number 9.
Okay, we'll just do one last question. My client wants to pay less than agreed to for no real reason. What should I do?
Well, I guess find out. I mean, they say there's no real reason, but there's going to be something behind it. It all depends on how much as well and the circumstances. Going back to our general disclaimer, you know, this is a specific situation and we're happy to talk to the particular person. If you want to email through, we're happy to talk in a bit more detail. But, you know, you've got to look at these sorts of things commercially. If it's a large amount of money and they're willing to pay some of it for their own cash flow reasons, or they're struggling, then you can look at it. But again, if you've got everything in place, then there's no real reason as to why you should be accepting less, because that's eating into your cash. So I'd take it, you know, consider it, but I wouldn't be accepting it straight away just for that reason. You've got to look at it commercially. Angela, what would you say about that?
Gosh, I'm reminded of a client that we acted for recently where somebody tried to do that very thing to them, and it was a considerably large debt. Our client had gotten quite excited about a new project and hadn't thought too deeply about the terms and conditions of the contract. The debtor company had a new management team come into play, and the new manager didn't want to proceed with the contract and place the client on notice that they just wouldn't be anymore. Unfortunately, our client had a 12-month subscription style contract, and they were only 3 months into that agreement, and he'd invested heavily, so it was important to him to make sure that he was paid for the full, either they used the full 12 months and paid for the full 12 months of that subscription. Terms and conditions came into play very heavily for that agreement, and also, you know, third parties negotiating the action. Legal recovery action was required, the matter was disputed, but ultimately the terms and conditions that were in place, the spirit of the contract held firm, and the client was able to recover monies. Now, was it the full amount for the full 12 months? No, not quite, but certainly considerably more than the customer was originally offering. So I hope that that's helpful to listeners today.
Okay, great. So we'll wind it up there, but just before we leave you all today, I just want to take you back to Craig. He has a special offer for our listeners that he'd like to take us through. Can you take us through that, Craig?
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. So today you've got obviously these 10 tips that we've spoken about, but we're also, as part of the relationship with CCIQ, as Angela mentioned, Optimum Recoveries is a success-based collection agency that only charges commission on a successful collection. And as part of the offer for CCIQ members, there's a discount available on the commission rates. There's also free of charge initial demand letters. So if your cash flow collections could use an Optimum boost, contact Angela McDonald today. Her details are on the slide that should be in front of you right now. So it's got her telephone number and email address. And also from Streten Masons Lawyers' point of view, we like to make sure that your foundation documents are up to scratch and offer you the security needed. So as part of our relationship with Optimum Recoveries, we offer a complimentary review of your current conditions, or if you don't have any, a review of your business and some suggestions as to what you should put in place. So if you've got any questions and like to take up that offer, then again, our contact details should be on your screen. And further to that, any other questions you might have in relation to the 10 tips or anything else to do with cash flow collections, debt collection, or the legal process, then again, feel free to email or contact us. We'd be happy to answer any questions. Optimum Recoveries also has fact sheets and an excellent manual that's available for anyone that asks as well. That gives a lot of information about certain things. Or it could be that you want to get your calculator out and go through with Angela the DSO calculations. She's happy to help with that as well. So feel free to contact her. So thank you everyone for joining us. Angela, did you have anything else you wanted to say wrapping up?
No, Craig, thanks. I think you've covered everything. So thank you to the CCIQ for allowing us the opportunity to present to you today. This completes the arrangement that we had with CCIQ to help with debt recovery tips running into the end of the year for members. But as Craig mentioned, there are lots of tips and hints available through Optimum Recoveries. A lot of them are on our website, optimumrecoveries.com.au, and we're happy to share that information. We're completely passionate about helping small business prevent debt and to be able to go into credit-based arrangements with their eyes wide open. So again, anything we can help with, happy to. And thanks again, CCIQ and Amanda.
Excellent. Thanks, Angela and Craig, for coming in today and presenting. Thank you to everyone that tuned in. We will send out an email on the next day or so with these special offer details and Angela and Craig's contact details again as well, and also a link to this webinar recording. So keep an eye out for that. And that concludes today. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.